Hi, I'm making a video to go over the front end. Um, so far, the structure I have is similar to what the professor had in the sense that he had um, a folder here with pages, which so far we only have 4 pages: the login page, the main page, the register page, and the verification page that Victor was working on. Other than that, in the images, we have all the logos and filter buttons and even some of the tabs. As you can see, here's tab list dark, tab list light. I'm just going to use the dark and light versions um, to represent when you're currently on an active tab. I'm still working on that. And this is the arc tab. Yeah, these names are not fully standardized. It's just kind of what I had them labeled as floating around in my computer, so I just moved them over here, maybe rename some of them. So here's one of the regular tabs for the main divs, the dark version, the light version. And then in the components, I have a large variety of components, and I have the folders user interface here. I also have the there's I think 2 or 3 user interfaces. I think it's actually just 2. The folders user interface, which is the lists tab div section, where we're going to have all the lists of places, and then the cards UI, where the list of not the list, but where the actual places are going to be displayed when you're searching or when you open one of your lists in the main page. So I guess I was thinking of starting with the login page, just so we kind of know where everything is. So for the login page, I kind of structured all of the page, I guess you could call these functions. I'm still learning JSX and how it works with React. So this is the general structure I have for most of the pages. I just have the big background body tag, I guess is what you would call it. And you can inspect the login and compare where everything's coming from. That background tag that's here is the same background tag you see here, and that's what colors it yellow. The styling for the body is mostly done in this app .css file that I have here. I think there might be a body tag, CSS description here. Here it is. So here's where I have the background color for the body and some more specifications. I think I was playing around with the CSS so much to the point where there might be some redundant CSS. So I might have to go back and clean up some of that code. So far, this is how it's displaying, and don't know why the folder UI opened. Let me go back to the login page. So yeah, that's this body tag here. Then within the body, I have a div where that contains all of my elements, or all of, I guess, like the title div and this tab that I have here and the larger center div here. The title div, you can see I kind of stacked it on top of, I don't know if you see here how this larger div is stacked in a grid. It has the title stacked on top of the, let me see, on top of this other div that contains the login tab and the center div here. So here on top you see that login tab, and right under it um, we have the center div here, which I have a template for the center divs, this light color center div, in other as a component. This is the template for the center divs in general here. Yep. And as you can see, because it has a class name of main pane, I could change that naming, but so far that's how I have it. The center div, if you wanted to change the color for the center div, for example, you'd have to do it by looking at this main pane CSS description here. As you can see, it shows that linear gradient that I did, how it fades from a darker blue at the top to a clear, transparent RGBA color on the bottom. And yeah, I think that's pretty much how the main setup for the center div. And then I specify making it larger or having it fit to window in the main page by, I guess you can say, injecting CSS code into the JS, into the JavaScript. I'll show that maybe when I'm looking at the main page, but for right now I just kind of want to show this grid layout format that I have, because a lot of what I have is set up in this sort of grid CSS layout. This main div, you can see it has, let me see, in this wrapper div, I guess you can call it a wrapper div for the login page, shows one row here, but I think again it just kind of, became maybe I could specify one FR. This FR, just what it does, I think if I erase this FR description here, it won't really do much, because the FR, what it does is it distributes the top layer and the bottom layer at a specific ratio. Like if you did 1 FR and then you did space 5 FR, it would ensure that the bottom stack here that has the login and the tab is a 4:1 ratio. So the title is 1 and the center login div would be the 4. So a 1:4 ratio. So it's kind of like setting up a ratio for the rows and how they're distributed. But I think because I didn't specify a second ratio, a second FR there, it's not really doing a ratio there. It's just kind of using the default size for that, for those divs. So within the bottom div here, as you can see on the top I have that title div, and on the bottom I have this other div. I have another grid layout, so I'm kind of wrapping one grid layout within another grid layout. So here's the grid layout that covers the two main components, and then here I have this grid layout that contains the tab and login div component. At the time, that's what made the most sense to me and just works. So that's kind of how I have it set up. If you inspect here, you can see that I gave the title header a class name title, and React doesn't give you a specific title name. As you can see, it says title at the end of this div, but it still has this auto-generated class name, the sc-dkptrn, I'm not sure how that works, but I think that's auto-generated by React or JavaScript. And after that class auto-generated title name, it gives it that actual class name that I gave it, which was title. So it'll first show div dot the auto-generated title name, and then dot whatever class name I gave it, which in this case is title. Let me see. All right, so here within, so now this login div that I have here, as you can see, it's div.mainPane. By the way, those auto-generated class names only are assigned to customized components. As you can see, this isn't a standard HTML component like div or body or whichever other, or paragraph. This one is my custom title header component. So I have this title header component, tab title component, login center div component. These components can all be found within the components folder here in the front end. So I think there's the so I guess I have to explain that idea I was talking about earlier about CSS injection. This title header, you won't find it here within the components, because really this is a version of the component I made called title. So here I styled, or I injected some CSS to give the login title a specific margin in comparison to the login title for the main page or the login title for another page. It just makes it so that I can reuse old components, and with the same CSS settings, but I can maybe change a couple things to make the same component look a little bit different when I reuse it. So let's say I want to use this light blue, let me see if I can find a better example here. Maybe a better example would be the login center div. This here, this login center div, the main pane. I have the main template for this in the CSS, like I showed with the gradient and stuff, but I reuse the same component in the main page. So let's see, if I go to main page here, I reuse that center div. As you can see, it's the same center div component I used. You see, center div, but for the main page, I called it center div main instead of whatever I called it for the login page. In the login page, I gave it a different name, but it's technically the same component reused with maybe a different size, maybe a slightly different color. Let me see, where's the login page? Let me open this to the right. Oh gosh, this is getting really crowded, but let me see, login center div. So I reused it as I had it. This is the original setting for it to be this square, small square, but this login center div, if I go into the login center div JavaScript here, you'll see that the name of the login center div is actually center div, not login center div. So I was able to reuse the center div in the main page with a different size. Where is it? So main page, as you can see, center div. There it is. So this light blue gradient panel I have here is actually the same panel I used. I think I could write it lowercase. Yeah, it's actually the same panel I use here to the left and the same panel I use here to the right. The only difference is that when I used it here, I gave it in the main page, as you can see on mainpage.js, I'm reusing the same component, but I gave it a different height, a different width, and a different margin, even though this margin might be a little redundant. I don't know, I'm just gonna leave it like that for now, but that's basically how this is set up so that I can reuse components in React, which is pretty cool that React lets you do that, because I don't have to remake the center div over and over again, and I can reuse it and not have to copy old CSS. It'll just modify whatever CSS was written, I guess, initially for center div over here. Yeah, so it might be a little difficult to keep track of, and I think it's also because I've named it a couple different things in different places, and I think that's because it was one of the first things I wrote when I first started writing the login page, and I was still figuring out naming and stuff. I might have to maybe make it a little more standardized later on. I don't know, but for now it works. So you see in the register page, register center div. Let me see, register center div. Right. The register page. So anything that gets returned to the screen is always going to be within this return statement at the end of the file. I guess it doesn't have to be at the end of the file, but usually it's written at the end of the file. So this is what's displaying right now in the register page. So let me show register really quick. Yeah, so as you can see, because I use the class name main pane, it's using the same configuration I had for the login. This small square versus the different dimensions I had for the main page. Yeah, I think the verification page, the register page, and the login page, all they use that same center div, main pane CSS from the app.css file. So, all right, let's see. Let me go to the verification page Victor made. So you can see it's the same exact size. Yep. By the way, these scroll bars are usually automatically applied when you specify CSS in the CSS. Let me actually go to a verification page. Maybe it shows it there. Verify center div. It's this one here. It should say overflow auto. Usually when you set the CSS to overflow auto, any text that would usually overflow outside of the div, it contains it within the div and it just gives it a scroll bar. So that's what that is. That's how the scroll bars have been used up till now. Any scroll bars you see, it's usually because I set that setting. Let me see the login. Main pane. Oh, actually, in the main pane CSS, I did give that specification here at the very end, overflow equals auto. So that's why anytime something overflows from a div, even in the main page, you'll see that when you zoom out or you add a lot of cards to this div, it automatically creates this extra scroll bar, and it's all because of that one line here where I have overflow auto. All right. Yeah, I also did an overflow auto here. That's why this has a scroll bar. I dealt with a lot of this overflowing with certain elements by using this, but I think that, like Victor pointed out, there's some things that have scroll bars that it's not really necessary for them to have scroll bars. So that's just something that's still under development because I've been prioritizing other things. Let's see. So yeah, this is the main page. This is the register page, the verification page. Pretty self-explanatory at that point. Anytime you see one of these custom components and you have a hard time finding it in the components folder, again, it's because within this page, I renamed the title component title header in order to specify how I want that component to look in this specific page I'm in. Because maybe I don't want the center div to be this big. You know, maybe I don't want the margin to be as high when I'm in a register versus in the login or versus in the main page. So if you're having a hard time finding these component names, tab title, title header, is because these are only being used inside of this file, these names, as you can see within the return. If you are trying to take a peek into the code for the tab title, you wouldn't look for a tab title in the component list. You would look for long tab. Long tab is what I styled, and I renamed it tab title to use within this page, within the register page. That's pretty important. Yeah, as you can see, a long tab, all that has, I have some CSS here for the tabs. I have the margins with auto, so that I have the margin left with auto, I have the margin right with auto, because when you do margin left auto, margin right auto, what it does, it helps you center your divs when you do margin auto for your right and your left side. So it just helps me center my divs doing these margin autos. Let's see. Okay, so that's probably one of the confusing things. The something that that might seem different is, let me see here on these pages. You see how I'm using styled here to restyle a component that I've already made. That styling is from this style, import styled from styled components. That is what's allowing me to restyle and reuse old components here. So with the same CSS without having to repeat CSS code. Let me go, since I went through the pages, I'll just go through the components now. So for the buttons are not really named buttons. The name that you use when you're using the components is whatever you export here. So the name of the buttons isn't button, it's button B. And then button B calls this button class, which I've specified CSS for here. So let me look for somewhere where I used buttons. Think I'd have to log in to Jenkins to show the example of buttons. So these broke folder lists, I've actually, oh, that's that scroll bar thing Victor is talking about. Yeah, I have to fix that. I don't know why it looks like a white square right now. It's weird. Well, this was supposed to be an X, and this was supposed to be a little pencil. Yeah. Well, anyways, these lists here, the folders these are actually buttons, and I've just restyled them to be a little bigger. So you see the edit button is a thinner version of this button, and really is the same button. I've just restyled it using that style from components, styled components, so that I can reuse this button and make it thinner over here. And I kind of did the same thing kind of with the save and the add. I reused this version of it, which I called something else. What did I call that one? So let me see. Main page. The main page has this center div. Yeah, and let's see, it has a wrapper div, and then it has another wrapper div, so bunch of wrapper divs. Alrighty, so I was trying to look for these buttons here, so let me see where I have that. In the main page, there's the list tab. That's this over here. Then the center div list. Okay, so as you can see, center div list was a restyled version of the center div. As you can see, I restyled the center div list and called it I restyled the center div and renamed it center div list with these changes in the CSS. I did the same for the right side, the center div component, custom component that I made, and I restyled it and called it center div main. Yeah, and that's what contains the cards UI. So if I want to look at these buttons and look at the code for these buttons, even though it is on the main page, the code for the buttons isn't going to be on the main page JavaScript file. It's going to be within this component here that's called the folders UI. it's just considered good practice distributing the code into these separate components into a UI component so that it doesn't become one big really long file, you know. Maybe the naming could be better, but that's the structure I have so far. So this is the folders UI. So everything you see, highlight it. So everything you see in this folders div here, that's the folders UI. So let's see. I want to look at the buttons. I'm using button B. So as you can see, button B is button. The reason I had to call it button B and not button is because apparently there's already a component called button, and I couldn't reuse the name button, so I had to use button B instead of calling it button. It's a small thing, but could be confusing when you look at it at first. So here's the 3 different buttons or 3 different versions I've made of the buttons. So here's the edit button, the add button, the save button. As you can see, the color for the add button is lime green here, and this is the I guess the hex value for the save button, and this is the edit button. Yeah, as you can see, I adjusted the width and the height for these, versus for the broke folder buttons, or well, I guess they're named broke folder here, but for the folder buttons, I reused, let's see, well, in this case, Victor directly used this list button component that I had already made over here, list button, and we just kind of kept the size of it. Or let me see if list button, I don't think we changed the size or anything of the button here. We were just using whatever custom size I had for list button, which if we look at it here, so let me just close this. The list button has actually not even a button, it's a div, and I think there was some things I could do with a div that I couldn't do with a button, and that's why I decided to make these little tiny divs. And this is all the specifications for these buttons here, including the font styling and all that, and the column gap. This gap here specifies what is it? Column gap. Well, usually the gap here just specifies the gap between the lists, between one button and the next, but I don't know if this would have been row gap that would affect it, that would affect this instead. Think if anything, the margin may be affecting it more in this case here of the list instead of, yeah, as you can see, the CSS is a little bit all over the place, and that's because I'm still learning CSS, so bear with me. All right, so that's what these are. This is the code for the folder buttons, and even though it's called folder button here, and I even specified it with the name, with the constant name folder, here I called it list button. Again, a little bit of inconsistency with the names, but this is the name that counts. Whatever name is going to be exported. As you can see, this is the name that gets exported. the list button name, not this folder name. I gave it here when I was specifying the CSS. So yeah, that's some reused button code stuff, and that's why when you're in the cancel, okay, what did I change? Well, I don't I didn't mean to change anything. So in the lists the folders UI, so yeah, there's some inconsistency. Sometimes I call the lists and sometimes I call the folders lists and list folders. I don't know, maybe you should just change all of it to be either list or folder. But I'll have to maybe do that later. All right, so as you can see, when I returned the list here, so I know that I did ask the API team to help connect to these buttons here, that X and that pencil button that I added here. I don't know why it looks weird right now. It looked so nice a couple days ago, and I don't know what changed. Maybe I have to pull from main or something. I don't know why. It had like a nice X here and a nice little pencil here. But anyways, yeah, I guess I'm just gonna focus on going over how this list structure works. Just so that when we're connecting the API to it, we kind of know what to look for. So the edit button. Okay, so originally all this returns is this edit button, at least all this specific div returns. Let me highlight it really quick. All this specific div returns right here is that edit button at the top, which is this, and then it triggers edit mode depending on whether you click on the edit button or not. You see on click edit mode function. And the edit mode only gets triggered when you click on the edit button. That's why I have this trigger here and this edit mode function. This edit mode use state. Use states are a little tricky to wrap your head around at first. And I still don't fully understand it, to be honest with you, but bear with me. So the use states within the folders UI gets initialized right here. We're using 3 separate use states, and I made this use state here for edit mode, which so it seems like it's constantly listening to see whether edit mode is triggered or not. That's why the default value for this use state is false. Like when you first log into the page, it's not triggered. Edit mode is not triggered. That's what this is. It's the default for the edit mode. It's false. Now, here, what it does is it gives you this on-click function, and the edit mode function sets the use state to true. It almost seems like I'm just using it as a regular Boolean, but I don't know. I think it works a little bit differently than just a Boolean. It was behaving differently depending on what I was doing. So just using this use state here. So the edit mode gets triggered when edit mode is set to true, or basically when this gets set to true. And all that edit mode is, it's an extra div or an extra component. I actually have an edit mode component here, edit mode. When the edit mode gets triggered, all it does is it populates right under the edit button, the save button and the add button when I click on it. You see, and then if I click on save, it sets the trigger back to false. So I was still figuring out how these triggers work, but I found like a cool little tutorial on how to use triggers, and I figured it was closely related to what we were trying to accomplish here, using a trigger here to accomplish this edit mode. So basically when you click on save, it sets the mode back to false. And the add is just add, but it doesn't really do anything. But so what happens is when you're returning, it only returns if the trigger is true. So all of this, the save button and the list that has the little icon, so that's what this part, this little map code is. Or actually, Victor is the one that figured out how to use these maps in order to populate the list from the database. These are all folders that are being pulled directly, or folder names that are being accessed directly from the database. And that's being done here with this folder, with this array of folders that was retrieved from the database, and it was passed as a prop array of folders into this edit mode. Passing props, or I guess that's what I'm calling it, passing properties, or seems to be the generic name everyone uses on these tutorials I've been watching, props, from one component to another can be kind of tricky. So yeah, just keep an eye out on if you whether you're using props or not, that you do so carefully. But this here is what repopulates. Mind you, I say repopulates because these folders here that don't have the little X and the pencil is not the same list you saw here. This is a different list that doesn't have the little folder and the pencil, but it's a list with the same information. And then here it repopulates it with a new set of divs that actually have an X and a pencil. And here's the version of it getting populated when the trigger is true for edit mode. And here's the version of it getting populated when you're not in edit mode. So this is what happens when you're not triggering the edit mode. You see it, the trigger is set to false for the list buttons. So there's actually two sets of triggers here. There's the trigger that repopulates the folders here, and then there's the trigger that decides whether or not these folders are going to have an X or a pencil on it. Sounds a little redundant, but yeah, the list button here has its own trigger as well. Let me take a look at list button here. Yeah, if you take a look at list button here, it has its own trigger as well that it's considering. There's might be a little bit of redundancy here. There might not be. I don't know. It sounds a little redundant to me now saying it out loud, but I don't know. It's what's kept it working up till now, having a trigger for the buttons themselves and having a trigger for repopulating the entire list. So they're two separate triggers. So list buttons have their own trigger here. Folder edit mode trigger. So folder edit mode. Okay, so folder edit mode is the version of the button that has the pencil. So this folder edit mode is the same button, but it's the triggered button that has the image of the pencil. This here, or this is the delete picture, or the delete source image. You see, I called it DEL, and I got that image from images cross delete.png from the images folder here. And then this here is the pencil, the renaming pencil, the pencil you click on to rename the folders if you want to change the folder. So yeah, there's two sets of triggers here. I don't know if this is the best way to go about it, but it's just the way I got it to work. And honestly, at this point, I'm just trying to get as much done, whether it's as quickly as possible, whether it's the prettiest looking code or not. But yeah, that's so far how this is working. So I don't know if we're gonna attach the API to this button, to this image here. I'm assuming in the folder edit mode, which is like the actual folder being in edit mode, with the cross and the pencil, we'd have to do like an on click for the image here, for the delete image and the renaming image. There should be like maybe an on click function. I don't know how you do on clicks for images assigned, but I think there should be an on name on click function specified here, but I don't really know how to go about it yet. And I'm still thinking about trying to get the tabs to switch and everything to gray out. So I know we only have about maybe a little over 2 weeks left. So I'm trying to maybe get us to figure this out together. Yeah, I think what Victor's going to be working on most likely is the cards UI now, since he was able to figure out how to use the map. I guess data type, I don't really know how map works, but he was able to get map to work for the folders UI. Where is it? You see here, this is the initial map that gets loaded when you first like if I comment this out, I think that this won't, wait, let me save it. Yeah, this won't load the first time because yeah, the triggered version of it only works once edit mode has been triggered for the first time. After edit mode has been triggered for the first time, then it displays all the folders. But if you reload the page, it will not have this initial loading of the folders. So that's why this line here is necessary. And this is actually the first the first way in which Victor got these folders to populate here using this line that was right here. This is gonna be necessary for that initial load. I don't know if there's another way to get it to initially load without having to call it twice, once here and within the trigger, but I think we have other more important things to focus on. Yeah. Anyways, so I think what Victor's going to be working on is the cards UI and trying to use a similar logic here, because right now, whatever cards you see here are not from the database. These 3 cards you see here are just these 3 example cards that I have here in the cards UI. So I think that's what Victor's going to be working on, trying to get this to populate directly from the database in the same way that it populated in the same way in which he populated the lists or folders UI. Yeah. Yeah, so what I'm going to be working on is getting these tabs to maybe change colors when we click on them. Trying to get this edit mode to gray out the entire div. I'm going to add that button for Jade so that she can redirect to an account settings page so that we can like change users' names and passwords and stuff. Let me see. Yeah, I'm also thinking about trying to get this this adding plus sign here to work so that when I click on it, it grays out the entire div and it shows that pop-up that tells you to pick a list to add to on the left. So I'm gonna be working on that as well. I think this field here, I don't know if this was necessary, adding so much CSS for certain fields. I don't even know which fields really I'm referring to here, but I think I was just trying to like standardize the way all the fields look like by making a component for it. Just like I tried to make like a standardized look for the link styled, or for the links anytime we use links on the page. Going through all this path, yeah, that's what we're using from Mern-B, I think it was. The search tab, this one I created recently. Yeah, the search tab's just let's see. Yeah, this comment doesn't really make sense here, I think. I don't know. I think I must have copied this over from another component. I've been rushing through some of this code, so might not be the most descriptive. Search tab. Yeah, I think. See, I don't really know where it's being used until I go to maybe this one of the center divs. Let me see. Oh yeah, the main page. These are the search tabs where I have food, activities, friends. This whole idea of using children as props was something else I had to learn to use, because when you have a custom div, you're not really allowed to put another div inside of it unless you have a children prop. So for example here, this center div list is a custom div, and I wouldn't have been able to put this folders UI div within it unless I made a props.children for it, and then this is considered its child. And that only happens when you're working with custom divs. Like when I'm using this regular HTML like div tag here, I can put as many tags as I want within it, but when it's a custom div, it's a little more complicated. Actually, if I go to center div here, you can see I have this props here, and I'm basically letting it know that if I do have any children within my div, it has to be called, it's assigned to the props as the props.children for center div. So if you don't specify this when you're making a custom div, you won't be able to put custom divs inside of other custom divs, which is, or any div for that matter within a custom div, which is kind of annoying, not being able to nest within your custom divs unless you specify this. But I'm sure there's some good reasoning for it. I don't know what it is right now. Not really sure how it works. Okay. Anyways, yeah, I was trying to see where I was using that search tab. So yeah, as I showed you the search tab, I was using it within the main page. This is the search tab is basically the CSS settings for how these tabs are. So these are each considered search tabs. So this, I think I called it a list tab or something like that, or a folder tab. Yeah, here it is, list tab. This one here, because it's a shorter tab. And these are images. These aren't actual, like, I don't know, I didn't make these tabs with CSS. These are actual images of tabs that I exported from Figma. So these are actual pictures. As you can see, I've formatted each picture to be to have an auto width, because yeah, the way I used grid layout for the tabs in itself was also like a long process. Let me see. I guess I can, not long process, but it was also like a tedious process, because I had to again do a grid layout within a grid layout within another grid layout. As you can see here, this is the big div that has everything, but this up here where I distributed the title and the buttons here on the right, I did that using that FR specification where man, I didn't show that part, but I guess the point is we have one big row here that is the top of the grid, and then we have this bottom, which is considered the second row of the large wrapper div. And then within this div, I have another grid, which is composed of two rows, the row with the tabs and the row with the div. This is the reason I used the grid layout for this, was so that no matter how you resize the page, whether you're looking at it on a phone or on a tablet, the tabs don't separate from the div. It seemed to be the easiest way for me to keep those tabs on the div without it floating around depending on what screen I'm looking at it through. So the grid layouts were really helpful. They were just kind of tricky to use at first, and this separation here, as you can see, for the search tabs, it's what I called them, the search tabs. Trying to see something really quick. Yeah, for the search tabs, I just used a flex layout, and I did a gap of 20 VH, and I did like the margin left and right to keep it centered, and oh, not center. The margin left and right was so that no matter how much you shrink or zoom into the page, the tab will never go past the edge of the bottom div. So basically this tab won't fall off the top of this div, the light blue div. No matter how much I zoom into it, there's always going to be a tiny little margin before it falls off. before the end of the div. Oh look, that's weird. When I zoomed in, you could suddenly see the, oh, that's because of the overflow auto. I'll probably change that right now because it is kind of annoying because the scroll bar is literally covering the picture. Let me see where this would be. So the main page again. I would use the pages as a good reference to look for where everything is and then find your way through the components. So we have the list stuff in the center div list. So that's center div list is not here. Wait, is it? It's not. So it's just a version of center div. So I'm just going to go let me see. Well, actually, all that center div list is just the light blue big pane that's in the back, in the background here for lists. So what I really want to look at is folders UI. So I'm going to go to folders UI. I know that my edit mode is what has the folder divs with the X's and the pencils. So when I go to the edit mode component or JavaScript that I have here with the triggers and all, I have the version of the buttons that has, that's true. So I'm going to look at list buttons. So as you can see, it might take a little to get like used to navigating through this, but here's the folder edit mode. Okay, so in the folder edit mode, we trigger how the folder looks depending on whether it's in edit mode or not. Okay, so finally here we have the X and the pencil, and there should be like an overflow auto somewhere. There it is. Maybe when I remove this, I don't know if maybe I might have to make some additional changes other than removing this. But when I remove this, the idea is that it will get rid of those pesky scroll bars. There you go. Nice. So that's basically what overflow auto does. If it can't find a way to fit images or anything properly, it'll just put scroll bars on it. Now I don't like how they're centered, but who cares? That's not important. But at least for now anyways. Once I guess I could save that, but yeah, now you know what's causing those scroll bars. Let me see. Okay, well, yeah, I guess the idea is to connect the API to these two buttons on this file. Not sure what the best way to do that is, but feel free to reach out or to share any ideas you may have in regards to that. Okay, I don't think I'm missing anything. I guess I did mention something about the FR like distributing stuff. So like in the title, I think that's the only thing I was missing mentioning how I distributed the surprise and these buttons up here with the FR something. I really don't even know what FR means here, but that's the top margin for main. I have the title, the surprise me button, and the logout button. I'll have to add an account button here. which I could do, but I'll do later. So it just actually has a flex. I'm just using a flex layout with a gap of 20V. Oh, I think I remember where it was I was using it. I was using it in main, so that this div was the list div, the big list div was perfectly proportionate to this other div on the right, the div with the cards. So in order to proportion them, I did a sort of ratio using the FR. Let me see, where are you? Yeah, as you can see, I have the list div here. Here's the list div with the tab on the top. And I have the search div, or the cards div, with the search tabs on the top here. And then wrapping both the left side and the right side, I have this wrapper here, and this is where I did the 1:4 ratio. So meaning no matter how much I zoom in and out of this page, the ratio for lists to main, or I don't know why I keep calling it main, from lists div to cards div is always going to be 1:4. Yeah, I don't know if you can imagine that. This being maybe 1 inch, and from the start of the left and the right of this div for lists, and then from the left to the rightmost end of the cards div, that would be maybe 4 inches versus this side being 1 inch. Yeah, we're all good at math, right? Anyways, yeah, so that's the only other CSS thing I could think of that keeps things in a nice proportion. I know we're mostly going to be working on connecting the API to this, so maybe CSS is not that important right now. But yeah, that's so far the layout. There's a lot of stuff going on, so if you do have a question, feel free to reach out. I think Victor also has a decent grasp over how the components are all connected and being reused, so feel free to reach out to him as well. I can't think of anything else that I would have to say here, but good luck. We're all gonna need it, and I'll talk to you soon.